The next subtopic is effects of stereotypes. Stereotypes have a wide range of influences on human behavior. They can lead to biases, distortion, generalization, and they can unconsciously affect judgment and memory, which in turn affects our behavior. Under this comes self-fulfilling prophecy. Let's understand what is self-fulfilling prophecy. Schemas and stereotypes can cause people to change the way that they think about themselves and influence their behavior. In some instances, people can unconsciously change their behavior, causing the schema to become true. This is called a self-fulfilling prophecy. I will give you an example so that you understand better. To make you understand, for example, there is a student who is just maybe average or above average in reality. Okay, but the teacher thinks or believes that he's very bright and smart and starts giving a lot of attention to that child. Cause of her, this belief and unintentional favors him more, so this leads to better performance of the child in exams. In reality, he was just average, but due to a belief of a teacher and her behavior, her belief turned into reality and the child did actually well. Another example, let's say there is a fitness coach who believes in a stereotype that men perform or are more serious in physical workouts as compared to women. And due to the stereotype that he carries or believes in, he starts focusing more on men than women in the gym. Hence, as a result, obviously, men outperform women here. So here the reality was something else, but schemas and stereotype changed the thinking and influenced the behavior. This is called a self-fulfilling prophecy. I hope it's clear. Now let's do one supporting study for self-fulfilling prophecy. Rosenthal and Jacobson 1968 conducted a classic study that demonstrated the self-fulfilling prophecy. Teachers in an elementary school were told by researchers that certain students were likely to be growth spurters or academic bloomers in the next academic year based upon results of an academic test. The test did not actually exist and the students predicted to be bloomers were chosen at random. Any difference between students was therefore in how they were now perceived by their teachers. The researchers observed the classroom dynamics throughout the year, and at the end of the year, the students were given an IQ test. Students that were labeled as bloomers demonstrated an increase in IQ, gaining higher scores than their peers. It appears that teachers' perceptions of the students' ability affected the way that the teachers interacted with the students, making the predictions of the students' ability become true. Later studies have discovered that teachers create a warmer learning environment for bloomers, allowing them more time to answer questions. They also give bloomers, more and better feedback on their completed assignments. Kind of a biasness that happens. So when looking at this research, we must consider what happens if we apply a label to a group of people on the societal level. If we consider women less able at mathematics or African Americans less able at science, it may affect their future life chances. Few opportunities in these areas may be offered to them, and this may affect future job prospects and earning potential. With fewer women and African Americans pursuing jobs in the areas utilizing these skills, the label may be seen to carry some level of credibility, in this way reinforcing the label and creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. Next topic is stereotype threat. What does it mean? Stereotype threat is the idea that people feel at risk of conforming to stereotypes about themselves. Stereotype threat is a major topic in social psychology. It refers to the idea that people are sometimes either at risk or feel at risk of conforming to stereotypes about themselves. I'll give you an example. For example, a man may not communicate his feelings well if he is aware of the stereotype that men are bad at being in touch with and communicating their emotions. The same thing might happen on a maths test. Again, if a woman feels at a risk of conforming to a stereotype that women aren't as good as mathematical thinking. It doesn't really matter that the stereotypes aren't true, because stereotype threat says that the stereotype itself pressures a negative performance. Basically, the man communicates his feelings poorly, or the woman performs poorly on the maths test because of the stereotype threat. It's like the pressure of vulnerability. Stereotype threat refers to the anxiety and apprehension experienced by an individual or members of a particular group when they start believing that their behavior in a specific situation may confirm and reinforce an existing negative group stereotype. There are many explanations as to why someone may underperform on a maths or science test, such as fatigue or lack of resources, but Steele and his colleagues claim that group stereotypes cause an individual to re-evaluate his or her behavior in relation to the stereotype, often leading to underperformance. The researchers argue that our social identities, old, young, male, female, white man, female teacher, and so on, become more significant when we are in specific situations. In turn, our social identity may affect the factors that we have to deal with in specific situation. Now, Steele and his colleagues call these factors identity contingencies. They claim that identity contingencies are the circumstances that we must deal with in order to get the desired outcome from a situation. Again, for an example, a woman about to sit for a maths test may be aware of the commonly held negative stereotype of the link between women and poor mathematics performance. Now, in turn, the anxiety that she feels as a result of this stereotype, this may affect her subsequent performance on the test. This may manifest itself in a variety of ways, including poor concentration, increased heart rate, which will result in inferior performance. Let's do one very famous and interesting study as a supporting study for stereotype threat. Steele and Aronson carried out a study to show how stereotype threat may affect an individual's test performance. Now, the aim of the study was to see how stereotype threat affects test performance in African Americans. Steele and Aronson defined stereotype threat as being at risk of confirming as self-characteristic a negative stereotype about one's group. The sample was made up of 114 male and female, black and white undergraduates from Stanford University. There were two independent variables in the study: the race of the participant and the test descriptions. Now, the participants were given a standardized test of verbal ability, similar to the SAT, and they were told one of the two things. First, it is a test to diagnose your intellectual ability. Second, it is a test for your problem-solving skills. In the first condition, the focus was on verbal ability. In the second condition, it was on problem-solving. Now, participants were randomly assigned to one of the two conditions. However, they made sure that there were equal number of participants in each condition. The following graph here you can see shows the mean test scores under each condition. There was no significant difference between male and female participants, so gender is not included. There were two experimental conditions. Condition 1 was that condition 1 was stereotype threat condition. In this condition, the test was described as being a measure of intellectual ability. This would cause the negative racial stereotype to become relevant to the black participants and establish stereotype threat. Condition 2, the non-stereotype threat condition. The test was merely described as a problem-solving task that was unrelated to intellectual ability. This should have not established any stereotype threat. Okay. Now, as you can see, African Americans did poorly when they believed that the test was a test of their intellectual ability, but did just as well as the white Americans when they believed that it was a test of their problem-solving skills. In other words, African American participants performed less well than their white counterparts in the stereotype threat condition, but in the non-threat condition, their performance equaled that of their white counterparts. Let's do the evaluation of the study. The sample was made up of Stanford University students, so it may not be representative and thus difficult to generalize the findings. Number 2, the study made use of an independent sample designs Verbal scores from participant sats were collected prior to the study in order to make sure that they were all within the norm of verbal performance and baseline. In this way, participant variability was minimized. However, a matched pair design may have been a better approach. 3. Although there is a difference between the two average scores, it does not necessarily mean that the participants experience stereotype threat. Their salience about their racial identity and their levels of stress during the exam were not measured in this first variation of the experiment. Later variations of the experiment showed, however, that this was most probably the case. 4th, according to Steele, stereotype threat turns on spotlight anxiety. What is that? Fear of failure, which causes emotional distress and pressure that may undermine performance. Students under the stereotype threat often underperform, and this can naturally limit their educational prospects. Next, this is the phenomena where people tend to overestimate how much others notice aspects of one's appearance or behavior. This causes a lot of social anxiety for people. Next topic is stereotype promise. Stereotype promise is the idea that positive stereotypes may improve an individual's performance on certain tasks, and offers the idea that stereotypes allow us to simplify information about the world and are therefore advantageous to us. Now, the opposite of stereotype threat is known as stereotype promise, and it offers an alternative view of the effects of stereotypes. As representations that save on cognitive processing, stereotypes are advantageous and even necessary for any individual to handle the complexity of incoming information from the external world. Beyond that, it also appears as if positive stereotypes may lead to improved performance on certain tasks in exactly the opposite way that stereotype threat leads to impaired performance. Now let's do one supporting study for stereotype promise. This study is given by Jennifer Lee and Min Zhou, conducted a longitudinal study in California investigating stereotypes related to Asian Americans and academic achievement. The stereotype holds that students of Asian ethnicity are smart, disciplined, and high achieving. Lee, as cited in Kaplan 2015, and this affected how teachers and counselors interacted with them. Lee and Zhou in 2015 interviewed 4,800 first-generation Americans in the Los Angeles area and found that Asian American students were more likely to be directed towards advanced classes and selective colleges, and this heightened expectation and obviously the opportunity as well appears to have led to higher achievement, partly as a result of the stereotype. This is somewhat paradoxical, as stereotypes are typically thought of having a negative effect on our behavior. Mexican American students were more likely to be affected by stereotype threat, as they felt they were not taken seriously as students and were not directed to advanced classes of selective colleges. Now, the main implication of this study is that it seriously challenges any assumptions and that achievement gaps in education are due to culture. Now, Lee and Zhou's 2015 findings indicate that the mere perception of culture in the form of a stereotype may influence behavior as much as culture itself. In this case, the stereotype of higher academic achievement in Asian Americans may have led to high achievement. Stereotype promise functions as the opposite of stereotype threat. Furthermore, American perceptions of Asian culture may be inaccurate, as Asian immigrants to the US tend to be hyper-selected. As Lee has cited this, immigrants from China and Korea, for example, are more likely to hold advanced academic degrees and higher skills than other immigrant groups to the US. In other words, Asian immigrants are not exactly a representative sample of their home cultures and countries. So stereotypes about Asian Americans are not really accurate. The same stereotype might made of a complementary segment of the most skilled and most educated, like European Americans or African Americans. Now, both the stereotype threat and stereotype promise evidence the ways that stereotypes may be internalized to become a part of an individual's personal and social identity, and so influence their behavior in negative and positive ways, depending upon whether the stereotype is threatening or promising. So I hope you liked my video and you understood the stereotype chapter really well. If you have any questions, please feel free to write in the comments below. And if you liked my video, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. If you have any questions regarding the topic or any other questions regarding psychology or IB psychology exams or ERQs, SAQs, whatever it is, please do write in your comments below.